guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel. It's your girl Noxie, aka the girl on site, and today I am taking you through the reasons why construction projects fail. So guys, this is such an important discussion because, construction, it's a high risk industry and it's high risk inherently. And what that means is that unfortunately, no matter what, there will be risks faced, and it's about how you mitigate those risks, which is the difference between construction success and construction failure. And I'm sure we've all seen it before, in your area, there's this new construction project that's coming along and you guys have expectations, whether it's a new shopping center or a new residential development, and you just all of a sudden see things die. All of a sudden the site is vacant, there's no one there, construction isn't going, just everything has fallen apart. So from the outside, it just looks like, oh, they've abandoned this project once again. But from, the inside looking outward, it's just so difficult dealing with the failure of a construction project. Construction is an expensive exercise as well. So just know that someone out there is dealing with a massive loss when it comes to a construction project that just doesn't succeed. And what's more is there are a lot of projects which don't even see the light of day, and people incur losses just financially, losses in time. You spend years putting together these projects. So I just felt like it's something I want to share with you all, especially with my experience over the years, the various different things I've seen that have led to construction failure. So every project has its own characteristics and specifics that make it different to another project. So the reason this project fails is not the same as the other project, but I feel like with the number of challenges I've seen, a lot of them kind of manifest in the same areas. So yeah, I think let's get into it right here and right now. I think that was a very, very detailed introduction. So essentially, with construction, right, there are many external dependencies. And for me, that's one of the primary reasons why it's such a complex exercise. It's a high risk exercise. It's not the same as, there's a lot of industries where luckily, the work you do right here and right now on your own laptop or whatever the case may be, you do that work and that's it. That's all that it takes to make the job get done or the industry to flow. So with construction, unfortunately, there's a lot of external dependencies, meaning that there are a lot of independent factors that come together to then make the project happen, right? So what is required to make a construction project happen, I guess, or what is required to actually undertake construction is what we call the 5 M's of construction. So it is manpower, money, materials, machinery, and methods. Those are the 5 things that come together to, make a construction project happen. And aside from those 5 elements, it's just a little summary that we have in our industry. I feel like what makes it complex is also the environment within which a construction project takes place. The construction industry is a heavily regulated sector, guys. So it's regulated in terms of the design aspect. There are regulations when it comes to what the building should have and should look like. The width of a passageway, the height of stairs, the number of windows a room should have. Guys, there's a law. I can't call it a law, but hence I'm calling it a regulation. It's what we call the building regulations. So it's all of that. That's one area. So in terms of the operations of the site, it's also regulated in terms of the Occupational Health and Safety Act. There's a number of restrictions and things on site when it comes to the number of people, the gear, safety gear that we have to wear, your hard hat, your reflective vest, your safety boots and things like that. And it's because the construction exercise, guys, it's dangerous. People die on site. So there are all these things associated with, how you should undertake the project, the supervision that's required, the insurances that you need to have in place. And then, of course, after your construction, when you operate the building, there are also other regulations, but I think that's a different side of the sector completely. Let's just focus on the actual construction and development side. So with that being said, guys, it's like I said, it's the 5 M's, the stuff that makes up a construction project, and then it's the fact that we operate within a regulated environment. So with that now, if I can just try and summarize the factors that contribute to failure with that kind of scene being set for you. Right. So I would say, just over my years of experience and the common things that I've seen that have led to failure, I can summarize it in three primary factors that lead to the failure of a construction project. And the first one is land. And land has subcategories. And those subcategories are, firstly, the ownership of that land, the services in terms of, water, electricity, and things like that, and then the rights and restrictions of that land. Okay, so first and foremost, when it comes to ownership, that's a big one, guys. Without land, if you don't own the land, you can't develop it. Without land, you don't have a project, basically. And what we found over time is that it's first and foremost, if it's an acquisition of the land, it's finalizing the funds required to acquire that land. The process, if you don't have cold hard cash, it can be complex, it can be lengthy, and there are often instances where the landowner simply withdraws from the transaction. He's just like, you're taking too long, I'm not going to wait any longer, I'm finding another buyer. And there you've lost your opportunity. And then number two, in terms of services. So basically, it's what we call bulk services. It's just the high density services you need to come into the development in terms of water, electricity, the sewer, which is the water leaving the property, the roads, how you access the development, and yeah, all kinds of other services, guys. So primarily, there are certain pieces of land that just don't have services, guys. And that drives up the cost of your project. If now, say for instance, you want to develop an apartment block and this plot of land actually just genuinely doesn't have services nearby. There's no main connection point within the vicinity of the plot for you to then connect to the municipality's services. So because of that, you have an expensive exercise to undertake to install bulk services that come into the development. So that can either make or break your project, because sometimes the services are just so expensive to locate towards the development that it's just not worthwhile. And there the project is lost. It's just a non-starter because there's no services in the first place. And then lastly, with land, this one's a big one. It's the rights and restrictions. So just to give you a background, every locality has what we call a town planning scheme. So with a town planning scheme, it basically dictates, the land use for each and every plot or property in and around the city. It's just the proper organization of a town. It's the reason why you don't have a nursery school in the middle of an industrial area. There are professionals out there who have planned the city and they have demarcated certain areas and things like that. So therefore, the land that you decide to purchase for property development, it has certain rights and restrictions. And that's the difference between whether or not your development will work in that area or not. So the problem with that is you then will design your project on this piece of land and you take it to the city. You have to get it reviewed and approved by the city. And it gets circulated between various departments. They'll tell you, okay, according to the zoning of this property, you can't exceed a certain number of levels. You can't exceed a certain, footprint over the site. You can't, A, B, and C. There's a lot of restrictions there. And then on top of that whole exercise to get your design approved, it also has a public participation element. So that's where you have to kind of like notify your neighboring property owners as to what this land is going to be or what we're going to develop here on this piece of property. And they can either reject or completely, refuse to support your development. And it's everything to do with even the example I brought up earlier, a nursery school in the middle of an industrial area, or maybe you'd like to build a nightclub in the middle of a suburban neighborhood. They'd be like, well, there's children here, we don't want loud music, we're sleeping and things like that. We're completely rejecting this development to bring a nightclub to our neighborhood. So there are good reasons for that public participation. And then there are areas where it can also go wrong. And it's what people call NIMBYism. NIMBY stands for not in my backyard. And what that means is there's a lot of property owners who then refuse certain projects because they feel like, we don't want that in our neighborhood. And that usually refers to affordable affordable housing projects and things. If you want to bring affordable housing to an affluent neighborhood, you'll find those property owners feeling like, no, well, your development is going to bring down the value of our properties in this region. We don't want this project here. And, you know, so that's where the term NIMBYism comes from. It's this kind of societal mindset that, you know, people don't want affordable developments in their area and things like that. So those are the three challenges when it comes to land. And that is one of the reasons why projects fail. I've seen many projects not even, you know, just get started because of all the issues associated with the land. And I forgot to mention, in fact, in terms of rights and restrictions as well, there is something called servitudes. And a servitude is where there's a portion of your land demarcated for someone else's use, right? So if you have a land where there's power lines running over it, Eskom has a servitude over that portion of your land because there are power lines, live wires running over your property, and there's a danger there, there's a hazard. So they will tell you, okay, because the power lines are running over this portion of the development, you can only construct up to here. There's not allowed to be a building underneath these power lines, you know? And then that influences the extent to which you can maximize the development of that land. Other examples include even private uses as well. There's some neighborhoods where maybe you've got a lake in the neighborhood and it's got like this whole cycle path and things. Maybe behind your property there's a whole portion there so that the neighborhood can walk through and access the land and access the lake, that is. So there will be a servitude where there's a right of way for people to be able to pass through this portion of the land to get to the lake. So it's things like that where you see all kinds of things going on when it comes to rights, restrictions, and of course, like I said, services earlier, and then of course the ownership aspect, and that is how land can get in the way of your development. The next item is one of the 5 M's of construction, which is M, manpower, and that actually refers to the human resources required to undertake a construction project. So we know it's not just men in the industry. Yours truly is out here. So we don't mean manpower like it's only men, but that's why I'm saying it's about the human element when it comes to developing a project. So there are 2 facets that I consider, and that is the team responsible for facilitating the project and the team responsible for the actual construction, and that's the guys on the ground actually doing the work. Now, both sides can cause failure in your project. If you have a team, and the professional team, that involves your architect, your engineers, your quantity surveyor, you know, the people who actually do the groundwork, the design, the budgeting, you know, so on and so forth. I've seen various different issues when it comes to the professional team, guys. We had one project where, you know, the quantity surveyor the appointed quantity surveyor completely undermeasured the development. They got started and all of a sudden they had all kinds of costs just that weren't accounted for, and it rendered the project totally unviable. There's been issues of design. You know, you've got a designer that just is actually incapable of the magnitude of the project. You know, there were just issues and they just struggled to get the plans approved, and it's just because the designer was incapable, you know. There's a variety of things that can go wrong. So on this side, if you have a professional team that just simply is not qualified, they're not experienced, that's where your project can literally lead to failure. And then on the ground, construction wise, this is now the guys, you know, laying the bricks and the mortar, the people managing the processes. Guys, if you don't have a capable team, people who don't know how to manage time, people who don't know how to manage resources, wastage on site can cost you an arm and a leg. If you have people on site wasting materials, you know, not managing materials properly, orders aren't placed on time, you know, that can lead to failure. You can have issues where progress is not being monitored, not being managed. So now a project that should have taken 12 months is 2 years in the ground and not going anywhere, can cause your project to fail. So these are heavy parameters that need to be considered when it comes to who you elect to design your project, cost and budget your project, you know, considering your engineering aspects. You know, you don't want your project to collapse. You know, there's all these things that can go wrong. And then definitely when it comes to building the project, you don't want the project to just take forever, because time is money. Literally in construction, time is money. Every day wasted on site is an expense that you do not need. So that is the manpower aspect, right? The human resources. Lastly, this is the biggest cause of construction failure. And it's another M in construction, the 5 M's. It's money. Guys, money is the number one reason construction projects fail. Construction is an expensive exercise. And as a result, most of the time, you're using other people's money. And that's what we call OPM. And I think, obviously, that term is synonymous with multiple sectors and industries. But construction is expensive. So it's either you don't have the money, it's either you don't have enough money, or you run out of money when you have already gotten the money. Do you know what I mean? And the issues there, it's first and foremost, it's a barrier to entry. So a lot of people struggle when it comes to wanting to participate in the construction sector because of not having access to the funding required to deliver construction projects. And we have a lot of funding agencies in this industry, commercial banks and so on and so forth. But in my sector, particularly where we're dealing with affordable housing, we're dealing with government and so on and so forth, they are actually government financiers, public institutions that avail financing. They're called DFIs, Development Funding Institutions, I think it is. So at least when you're dealing with DFIs, there's more of a mandate to fund, affordable housing developments. I mean, there's entities out there that fund all kinds of projects. So backyard developments, they fund township developments, they develop rural developments as well. So we've had to become more creative in South Africa to avail funding, especially to previously disadvantaged developers. In our country, we know access to funding is something that our marginalized communities do not have. So that is why our government-owned funding institutions have to deliver funding instruments that meet our people's needs. So I highly recommend, if you're trying to get into construction, instead of walking to your commercial banks, go and start considering approaching the DFIs, because they've got more of a mandate to assist and fund smaller developers in the township, whatever the case may be. So that's just advice. So that was the one challenge, accessing the money. And then number two, when you've accessed the money, but you just don't have enough of it, then it boils down to issues of the viability of your project. Guys, sometimes you need to call a spade a spade. It's difficult when you're so passionate about a project and you really want to see it come to light, but it's just not a viable project, unfortunately. That is where you need to go back to the drawing board and do what you can to have to. Either maybe it's the manpower that you've appointed, your team just doesn't have the means to kind of tweak the project and make it viable, but also sometimes what you're trying to develop is something that just, it needs to be reworked completely, and it's not working because of, the parameters that you've kind of insisted upon. So there's a variety of things that happen where now you've got access to funding, but then even the institution that's funding you is kind of like, but this project is not viable. You need to do something there. So then now lastly, guys, when you run out of money, again, just in being transparent and honest, a lot of the time it's due to mismanagement of funds. I think the challenge here is that because construction is so expensive and you deal with large sums of money, there's this misconception that you've got a lot of money. No, it's a lot of money because there's a lot to do. It's not that there's a lot of money and now you get to blow it. And a lot of people make mistakes. They spend money recklessly. They're not prudent when it comes to measurement. Something happened on site. Okay, let's just sort that out. And you plug holes with money and you end up running out. So always know that, millions of rands look like a lot of money, but when you've got a project to deliver, every cent is going somewhere. So that's where you need to be careful. So yeah, guys, those are the 3 main reasons why construction projects fail: the land, the manpower, and the money. So I hope that this has been helpful, and I feel like it's a conversation we can actually break down even further. But I think let me leave it here for now. I'd love for you to just ask me questions, guys. Let's chat about it. Let's help people understand what they can do to just avoid the situation completely. I'm telling you, it is the worst position to be in when a project is failing. I've been a part of it where you've had to tell people that, look, we are terminating our agreement with you because the project is clearly not progressing. You are unable to deliver. It is a horrible position to be in, especially the human aspect when you know that somebody has spent years resources, time, trying to make this project work. And when it gets to that point where it has reached failure, no one wants to be in that position. So I hope this episode has helped you. Please let me know if it has. And please like, share, and subscribe. And I'll see you in the next episode. Bye.